Hello and welcome to this introductory webinar on office politics. In the next few minutes, I'm going to be giving you an outline of what office politics is and help you to think about your role in it. I'm going to take the camera off so you can focus on the content and what I'm saying. So for those of you that don't know, I'm Joanna Gaudoin. I run Inside Out Image, and everything I do is about helping individuals progress in their careers and organisations perform better and have a competitive edge by working with their people. I typically work with people that are very technical, very bright, perhaps have a lot of professional qualifications, but they need to work on their other skills to progress their careers and maximise their potential for their company or business. I work with them on their personal impact and their relationship management skills. So how they come across in every professional scenario, whether that be day-to-day office politics, as we're talking about today, networking, presenting, managing teams. I work with clients individually, and then I run group sessions such as masterclasses and workshops, as well as speaking at events such as conferences and other events such as networking. So today I want to cover three key areas. I want to start with looking at what office politics is. Then we're going to look at some typical political animals, which I shall explain more later on. And then we're going to look at some key skills that you will want to consider to help you be more positively politically intelligent. So starting by thinking about what office politics is, and when I ask people words that they think about when they think of office politics, they mention ones such as influencing, manipulating, string pulling, the old boys club, gossiping, cliques, claiming success. The list goes on. There is usually a theme though that they're pretty negative. People usually have a negative association with office politics and the impact it has at work. Office politics is actually something that's never taught anywhere. If you go on a leadership skills course, it's rarely ever mentioned. It's not mentioned in MBAs or other degrees in this area, but actually it starts when we're very small. If you think about when you were 5 and you wanted some sweets and you perhaps asked one parent for sweets and they said no, the natural thing to do was, of course, to go to the other parent or another adult and ask for sweets. So we've all done that, I'm sure. So essentially, it's a way of trying to get what we want, perhaps the less formal way, you might say. Negative politics has a massive impact on both individual and organisations. It really can affect what happens at work. So it can impact productivity, motivation, decision making, and trust overall. At its extreme, it can cause a lot of ill health in individuals and is one of the biggest causes of stress and absence from work in the UK. So there is a good reason to work on office politics and having the right positive skills so that we don't suffer these effects. And as an individual, opting out of office politics never really works if you want to progress your career. It's about learning how to navigate it positively. So, what is political? People always think everybody else is political except them. But actually, if you think about this scenario for a moment, you're approaching the coffee machine at work. There's a man and a woman from your team having a chat there. As you approach, they stop talking. In that moment, you will come to a conclusion in your head why you think they stopped talking. You're not going to think of all the different options. Now, of course, the options are they were talking about you, they were talking about something confidential. I always get when I ask this question, they were having an affair. But of course, they could have just finished their conversation at that point, or perhaps they were trying to be welcoming and stop talking because you were joining and they were going to invite you into their conversation. What affects which of those conclusions you come to largely depends on where you're at. So perhaps you had a challenging discussion with one of those people that morning. Therefore, you're probably going to instantly think that they're talking about that to the other person and relaying what's happened and perhaps even how they disapprove of what you said. Or if you feel more positive that day, perhaps nothing particularly adverse has happened with those people and you're feeling in a good, confident place, you'll just think they've finished their conversation. So actually, it is where you are coming from that can impact what you think about it, and you have actually no idea why they stopped talking at that point. So we always need to think about, what are we really seeing in a situation? So we see others as being political, but actually, how are they seeing you? You understand your behaviour because you know your assumptions, your motivations, your values, and your beliefs that drive that behaviour. But that might not be so obvious to other people. So we need to think very carefully about how we're coming across at work. We need to think also about how our ongoing beliefs or what we hear affect our behaviour. It is very easy, if we've had, say, some negative feedback about a project we're going to present, perhaps someone's told us we're going to get some challenge from that at an afternoon meeting. We go into that meeting believing it's going to be difficult. So that perhaps impacts your behaviour if you're not careful, makes you a bit defensive about the proposal you're making, which then will affect other people's behaviour. And perhaps in that instance, the other person that told you there would be a challenge was wrong, and there isn't one, but you've reacted as if there will be one. So always think carefully about, what are you believing? Is it definitely true? Because the danger is, if you let it impact your behaviour, that can start a whole negative spiral. So it's important to know the impact elements have on your thinking, and also how to break out of different cycles of behaviour with people, because of course that can then become ongoing. I said I was going to talk about some animals. This is a very simplistic way of thinking about behaviours at work. When we do an in-depth diagnostic, which I do with both groups and individuals, to understand how you are being perceived at work through your behaviour, because as I said, we don't think we're political, we think others are, but of course we're very often communicating things we don't realise. There are 10 different profiles, but I'm just going to talk about 4 here that are real extremes but help you to think about some of the behaviours. So I'm going to start with the fox in the top left corner, and words we associate often with a fox might be cunning, sly, adaptable, resourceful. So at this point, I'd say to you, who in your workplace might have some of these characteristics? And what does that mean for how you interact with them? Perhaps you're a bit more careful. An owl, they're commonly perceived as quite wise, they're quite calm, they've got great eyesight, they view from afar, they live up in trees, we don't often see them. Who is that at work? Who is that person? Bottom left, mule or a donkey. So they are typically seen as reliable, a bit bad-tempered. They work quite hard, they're sure-footed, but they can be unpredictable. Who is that in your workplace? Who are you not quite sure of? Who are you thinking not sure how they're going to react today? Lastly, sheep. Pretty innocent animals, not the brightest, tend to go around in groups, run if you come near them. Think about, who does that represent at work? Whose behaviour could that illustrate? As I said, they're very simplified. Nobody, when we do a diagnostic, fits purely into each of those boxes, but it's just thinking about, what could that represent? And on this chart, I want to have in mind that there are 2 axes, in fact, that are demonstrated here. One is goals horizontally. So those on the left-hand side are typically very orientated towards their own goals, whereas those on the right are not only thinking about themselves, but also the organisational goals. So that's an element to think about there. And then on the vertical axis is political intelligence. So here we're thinking about, how well does someone navigate the environment? And it's not saying that you always want to be an owl, being highly politically intelligent and thinking about both types of goals, but it's knowing when to behave in different ways. For instance, if you're being made redundant, then you might want to behave more like a donkey, because you need to think more about your own interests in that situation. So thinking really carefully about how you might come across and how are others coming across at work, and how can you be more politically intelligent? And here I want to focus on 4 key types of skills. So the skills fall into 4 buckets, and when we do a workshop, the workshop's very long because we're looking at the diagnostic profiles of different people, we're looking at specific skills they need to work on under these headings, and also specific challenges that they have with other people and working through some of those in the workshop for real. So I'm just going to give you a taster of a couple of tips by each heading. So starting with communication. So for yourself, think about how open and transparent are you? How can you create more trust with people by being as transparent as you can? This means even if you need some information from somebody and you can't tell them why, being upfront and just saying, I can't explain why now, but can I please have XYZ from you? Another tip is to think about your consistency of your communication, making sure you're giving one message to all, particularly if people may speak to one another. This reflects on you as well, what sort of person you are. If you've heard me talk about anything to do with personal brand, you will hear me talk about consistency. To make sure you're seen as a reliable, trustworthy person, consistent communication is absolutely key. Networking is the next one. So thinking about who has power in your organisation, who do you need to know? There's the obvious people, the CEO, the MD, other senior people, but who else is there? Very often the PA, secretary to those important people is really key as well. They are a gateway. And there are in fact lots of different types of power in organisations, not just positional power. So knowing about those is important. And there's an article about that on my website. Think about who you're networking with. Are you networking with just people like you? Do you need to work with people day to day that are different? So how could expanding your network beyond people that you work with and are like you really help you? Create a plan for making sure you do that. It's too easy to avoid it otherwise. I'm going to go on to influence next. So think about the personal style of your boss. How do you need to engage with them more effectively? A simple thought is, if they're not a morning person, then hitting them with a hard challenge or a problem at 8:30 in the morning is probably not your best plan. If you're going to an important meeting, thinking about who's going to be there, which key stakeholders are there, what are their situations, what's on their agenda, what's in their interests, what perspective are they coming from, can really help you to have greater influence if you're considering these elements. And lastly, factor X, which essentially wraps up a lot of skills that don't fit under the others. But a big one here, and I mentioned it a minute ago, was personal brand. Thinking about what is your reputation, how do people describe you, what do they think about you, and making sure you've considered your own personal brand and what you want to communicate to others. So how can you build more trust at work? How can you work collaboratively with people to make sure, not to use a cliche, but there's a win-win outcome? Because that's much better than just trying to fight to win your own corner all the time. The minute you're fighting to win, that means there's a loser, and that can have big consequences. So think about how you can generate trust. How can you help others to achieve their goals and work together? So I hope that's given you a bit of a taster for the different skills that you need to work on to be positively politically intelligent. If you have more questions, you're very welcome to get in touch with me. But I'd like you to think about at this point, what do you need to consider? Where are you in terms of office politics? Do you avoid it? Do you think you navigate it well, or you need to work on some elements? It's one of the 9 skills in my short series and e-booklet. If you haven't read that and you'd like it, it's a free short series and booklet. So use the web address there to sign up for it, and that will come through to you. Do connect with me on LinkedIn. There's a lot more resources that I provide on LinkedIn in addition to my newsletters and my website. And lastly, if you have got a specific question or you want to book a no obligation 30-minute career booster conversation with me, then email me on that address or contact me through the contact form on my website and we can arrange that. Whether that's in the next few days or in 2 years' time, whenever you decide you want to think about this topic a bit more. So my challenge for you as I end is to ask you what you're going to do to move forward with this. How are you going to use what you've learnt today? And who are you going to ask to support you to make sure that you do make some progress? Thank you very much for listening today, and I hope this has been useful. Thank you.